Nobody Gets Jack by Markie Isabella Strange. Read by the author.
A streak of blue illuminated the scene, but only for a moment. The curse hit its target, sending Jack tumbling down a steep incline. Rocks and sticks and thorns, taking turns attacking as he rolled uncontrollably, stopping only when a tree decided to knock him the rest of the way out. He lay there unconscious, bleeding from the brow, for a good half a minute before awakening confused. His mind reminded him nearly immediately as the pain coursed through. He tried to sit up, it was impossible. The sound of footprints and dogs barking somewhere above him told him he needed to go or die, so he gritted his teeth and pulled himself up with the use of the tree that nearly cost him his face and stumbled forward. It was not just the fall that did him in, though. He could feel the toll of the curse that had hit him initially, working its way through his system like a tranquilizer. No, it was not the pain that made his legs feel like it was made of jelly. He refused to let that stop him, and kept moving. There were magical orbs of light scanning the area for him. He dodged their light, hiding here and there strategically as he could. But it was difficult, for he did not exactly know where he was going. He had to let instincts guide him. As he walked, he felt himself going unconscious. It was like he was a zombie barely awake, pulling his dying corpse into action. "I found it! Don't hesitate! If you have a shot, go for it!" Another streak of blue illuminated the scene, then another, and another. They struck so near him, he felt the heat and the wind of it as it struck the random nature around him. One hit and the tree limb near his head, and the explosion stripped the bark, splitting it everywhere. He almost wished they were bullets and not spells. It was time to move or die, so he took off as fast as he could, but that was a mistake. He left himself open, and another spell struck him square in the back. It was like a bull had charged him and won. He was knocked off his feet. He spit mud and forest from his mouth. Breathing was difficult. He tried to push himself off the ground, but could not. "I got it!" He was not going to die here. He crawled forward, the dogs near him, the footprints drawing closer. Here he found himself on the edge of a cliff. Below was a sheer 10-foot drop to the icy river. It was not a desirable choice, but it was his only choice. He would climb down and into the water. He pulled himself over the ledge, holding on to the roots, lowering himself down, trying to find another foothold in the dark. His strength was gone, and he let the damn thing slip through his fingers. He fell. The last thing he could remember was the impact. He landed gracelessly in the rushing water like a corpse, and the ringing in his ears nearly deafened him. He choked on the water, swallowing way more than he should have, then passed out, floating as a dead man down the river. The balls of light scanned the area, not straying far from their master's wand. Those that did fizzled and died, uniting once more with the magic in the air. The dogs stopped at the edge, barking their signal to their owners that this is where the trail ended. "Good boy! Good girl!" "Damn, we lost him!" "You think he survived?" "Good shot, rookie! But it's not that easy to kill a wolf." Men and women in uniform, with reinforced leather armor and cloaks. Officers of Merlin Oak, no doubt. "It's gotten down the river." "No, we will return and reinforce our guard in the city. It dares not return now." Jack was no stranger to being in trouble or chased, but this might have been the nearest he came to death. He floated down the river for hours, his body taking a sweet time healing. The magic left his body, slowed all his vitals down. He felt more human than he had in years. He had caused quite a stir in Merlin Oak City, gambling and drinking, women and men, and whoever else willing. Willing, this is important. Because, hey, I'm a man-whore, not an immoral fiend. Fighting, lots of fighting. At one point, he must have given himself away. It was hard to remember when, but the townsfolk knew then that he was more than just an unruly asshole. Now he floated too weak to fight the currents taking him. It was up to fate whether or not he drowned or survived. Blackness turned to light, and a familiar tune of a memory phased into focus. It was around 4 p.m., and the sky was gray, but hadn't yet rained. Damien Eldador's stupid face came flying back into his mind. Why was he thinking about this moment now? "You look funny for a girl," the elf boy said through dirty teeth. He was glad Damien was several feet from him. Clearly he didn't take care of himself, and his breath probably stank as bad as his attitude. "Yeah, well, you look stupid for an elf," a young Jack spat in return, and that's all it took for the two to start throwing hands. The elf boy took a swing, but Jack was both small and fast and moved in for a hard punch to the face, nearly breaking the boy's nose. Blood started to drain from the right nostril. Damien was a cad, but he could clearly take a hit. He smiled and wiped it away. "Lucky shot, bitch." He laughed and went for him again. But Jack was clearly an excellent fighter. His instincts were far superior, and Damien barely had a chance. He quickly dodged and struck him in the jaw. It was at this point his friends realized that Damien didn't stand a chance one-on-one, and with a show of support for their idiot friend, they joined in the brawl. Jack pushed two of them away and struck Damien in the mouth. He kicked another in the balls before being attacked from behind. There were 6 of them and 1 of him, and even with the effort, he was ultimately outnumbered. He put up a solid fight, though, stomping on one bully's foot and headbutting another, nearly escaping before being grabbed firmly, allowing poor Damien to cheat and beat him while his hands were pulled behind his back. Jack spat the blood in the elf's face and struggled to get free, but with each blow he was nearly done for. Another boy from across the yard came to see what the commotion was about and tried to help, but was laid out on his ass before he knew what hit him. Damien wasn't a bad fighter. He was capable of damage, but Jack was too stubborn to be taken out in a fair fight. A lot of adults ignored the situation and went on with their day. Kids like them were not worth their time. But one such person spotted the unfairness and quickly went into action, slapping one boy and pushing another to the ground. They took one look at her, and the countenance went from shock to fear and scrambled to their feet. The boys let go of Jack, letting him crumble to his knees, half awake, half unconscious. "Sorry, miss," the last bully said before taking off to join their friends. Must have been someone fierce to influence the boys to be cowards. Jack turned to see his rescuer. She was helping the other boy, the one that tried and failed to help, off the ground. She might have been a bit spooky, but it wasn't immediately clear why they acted the way they did. "Thanks," the boy said, clearly looking scared, as if he too wanted to run. What was it about this woman that caused so much distress? "Are you all right, my dear?" she asked, coming to help him. Though he probably needs someone to lean on, Jack refused. "Thanks, I guess," he said. "I had them where I wanted them." He spit on the ground, blood still welling up from a busted lip. "Didn't look like that from here," the woman said. She wore a thick green dress with lace cuffs, fancy. She was rather tall, nearly 6 foot, made even taller for her use of high-heel boots. Her hair was chocolate brown, and even though she looked a bit older, she had a model's face. It was as if carved from marble, something an artist might draw. She didn't smile, nor did she frown. It was rather difficult to judge her thoughts. Even her brown eyes gave nothing away. "Yeah, well," Jack said. "Can't always judge things just by the looks of it." "Wise," she said. "So why do you waste your blood like this?" She had a closed black lace fan, which she used to indicate. "I don't know what you're getting at." "If you're going to spill your blood into the dirt, at least make it worth your while," she said. "Blood is a precious life force. A little like fine wine shouldn't be squandered so frivolously." "It's nothing I can't handle," Jack retorted. "My heart makes more." "Wrong, your bones do. But that's not the point, child," she said. "Does your parents know their daughter's picking fights with boys?" she asked, and this made Jack annoyed. "Please don't call me that," he said. "What?" "I'm not a daughter." "Okay, my mistake," she said, finally giving some humanity with a half-smile. "Whatever you are, you have parents, don't you?" "Not," Jack said. "Well, I'm truly sorry about that," the woman said. "My name is Lucinda Lupe. Perhaps you may have heard of me." "Sorry, no," Jack said. "Well, it doesn't matter. If you're looking for something more than just needless violence, then come meet me tomorrow by the docks. Since you have no parents, you don't need permission. Are you offering me a job? Jack asked, a bit taken aback. Sure, why not? Am I wrong in assuming you need a life beyond being smacked around? Jack smiled, for this could be the start of a great adventure. Sure thing. What about my friend here? He tried to come to my rescue. Deserves some credit. The boy looked shocked for a moment that he even existed, then shook his head. Not friends. I don't like seeing people unfairly treated is all. Jack looked at him and laughed. At least he was being honest. Also, I have parents, and they're not dead, and, I have to get back to them. The kids took off running, as if he had just discovered he had legs. That's weird, Jack said. I get that a lot, she said, then smiled, showing a mouthful of fangs. He blinked, old memories fading like dreams. Where the hell was he? Why was he wet?
Oh, yeah.
He was looking face up through waterlogged brush that had got caught in the shallows near the bank, alive, but barely. The moon's light was beaming down on him through the roots of an old tree. His head was surrounded by the water, blocking out his ears. His head was resting on a rather sharp rock. Mud was dripping down, and somewhere a small fish was wiggling around him. He grunted, pushing himself out from under the drowning tree, and turned over in the water. He pulled a leaf off his face. It was fucking cold out here without his fur. He stuck in his head and rinsed some of the mud off with the running water before standing up.
Ah, shit. What happened to my shoe?
He realized that he had only one. The other had somehow come off the water. He spent a minute looking in the area, and with a bit of luck he found it snagged on a rock, an undefined piece of metal. He took his shoe, dumped out the water, and tossed it on shore a couple yards away, then made his way to it.
You almost got me,
he said weakly.
but nothing gets Jack. You hear?
He put his middle finger in the air at no one in particular.
Nothing.
He took up his shoe and hobbled over to a large boulder and sat and struggled to put it on. He hated the feeling of putting on wet shoes and the sound it made when he walked like a plunger.
Oh, God damn it.
But still, he was happy to be out on dry land. He didn't hate the water, but he was a prune.
Ugh. I certainly drank enough of the water for the fungal rot to set in. Or whatever.
He was no doctor, but it was still...
Fish piss. Can't be too healthy.
He walked forwards towards the woods, which gradually sloped up a cliff. It was also very rocky. He was glad at this point he had found his shoe. He stopped, looked around, nothing about his surroundings familiar. He had no clue as to where the hell he was. It was beautiful, but he needed a place he could start a fire and take off his clothes. He could probably make a guess at his location in respects to the towns near him once his head stopped pounding and his teeth shut up. Navigation was better in wolf form, but that shit wasn't an option for him at this point. The main purpose of the spell that had struck him was to prevent it. It was the side effect that made him feel like he was up all night drinking. Of course, he had been drinking until assholes chased him out of town.
Oh, man. They kicked my ass.
He laughed to himself. He still felt like an old man, and not a young pup. He was only 23 in human years, but goddamn did it feel like 100 years older. Quarter up the cliffside, he spotted a perfect spot to shelter, given that it wasn't being used by a bear or some shit. There was a large ledge with an overhang, making it kind of a half cave.
Of course.
He cursed.
Couldn't be a hole in the ground. Had to be up a fucking mountain.
Just to be clear, it was nowhere near a mountain, but at that moment it might as well have been. He was not in the mood to climb. He was scraped up, burned, and hopped up on magic, but his energy was better than it had been. Luckily, it wasn't much of a climb considering the boulders acted as kind of a wonky staircase, and it wasn't until he reached the overhang that he had to pull himself up and over. He turned and sat at the edge for a moment, letting his feet dangle. The scenery was beautiful. He loved the outdoors. This was true even before he turned, but it certainly grew more instinctual in the years after. Then he stood up and looked around at his camp. It really was perfect. He could make a fire right in the center. There were rocks large enough to be used as chairs. There was even a tree reaching out all creepy-like that made for a perfect hanger for his clothes. He stripped one article of clothing at a time, wringing them out and hanging them up on separate branches. Underwear, too. Fuck it. He was alone, and honestly, fuck it anyway. He didn't care. He took off the wrap binding his chest, wrung it out, and hung it as well, taking in a few deep breaths.
Oh, that's nice.
Maybe the pain was not the only thing that made it difficult to breathe. It felt better to be out of his wet clothes, but it was still quite chilly. He would need to create a fire. He walked over to his pants and felt around in his pockets, hoping without faith that it was still there.
Oh, thank God,
he exclaimed, pulling out a rainbow lighter and trying it.
Fuck.
It didn't work. He blew on it, shook it a couple of times, and tried again.
Come on. Come on. Oh, there you are, motherfucker.
The fire danced, then blew sideways and scorched his finger before going out, he said, rubbing his finger on his side. He gathered some wood and twigs and rocks to build a fire pit right in the center, grabbed the larger rock he deemed a chair, and brought it closer. He grunted a little with pain.
Jesus.
He really was in bad shape.
Now for the fun part.
After the third or fourth try, he got it lit, and after a solid minute, it was well on its way to becoming a lifesaver. He went and found a long stick to use as a poker before settling down and warming himself. This was going to be a long-ass night. At some point he had fallen asleep. The tranquilizer was still taking its time to leave his system. When he opened his eyes, he had almost forgotten where he was. His head felt like a mule had kicked it. It was still dark, so it had not been more than a couple of hours. The fire was nearly out, but not quite. The lasting embers were still glowing orange. He felt a bit stiff. The ground wasn't all soft, seeing as it was pretty solid rock. He stood up and stretched. His arms and legs began to grow and bend in its inhuman form. His ankle elongated, becoming a second knee. His hair growing rapidly into fur. His face contorting into a beast.
Oh,
he moaned.
That's better.
He stretched a few more times and sniffed the air. He was a whole 2 feet taller in wolf form, and his voice dropped considerably. He liked that most of all. He walked over to his pants, which were still wet, and decided he didn't need it. He would make his way to the next town, take something off the lines, and be done with it. He stepped off the rock and into the forest, sniffed the air, picked a direction, and went.